But there's nothing that's occupied our minds more over the past month than selection. The existential crisis: when is an Australian team not an Australian team? And when is selection guessing, which has been put on the radar? His is routinely the hottest seat in the sport. I could make the case it's the hottest seat in sport. Chief Selector George Bailey. George, great to have you back on the program.
Morning, Gerard.
Publish and be damned. Do you sample the critiques that come for your handiwork?
Yes, some certainly cross the desk, yes.
How do they make you feel when they arrive?
It's great, really, isn't it? I think if you take a big lens on it, people are passionate about it, and people care so much because it's their test team, and I imagine you could be picking a water polo team or a hockey team and not get as much grief. So it's great. There's obviously, it's a huge summer, huge anticipation, and we're as excited as anyone.
Yeah, I've never known anticipation like it for a test series so far out. But just let's do the white ball first. That there is an existential crisis, George, which you have to manage your way through. Is it problematic to have Australian teams in high-profile matches without a critical mass of your first-choice players?
Yeah, I can be. I mean, we've been really clear that the priority for this summer was going to be the Test series, and by virtue of that, nearly every individual in that Test squad's had a different preparation. There'll be a couple of fresh babies in the ranks across the summer. Some have played Shield cricket. There's been some one-day domestic cricket, one-day internationals. Everyone's looked a little bit different. And in amongst that, there's been some big physical blocks for players as well. So. Unfortunately, we may not see the full benefit of that planning until even potentially the end of the Sri Lankan series. But there's a bit of thought that goes into it. I guess on one hand we often stand accused of having an ageing Test team, and yet on the other hand, when we do get some games into some players who we see as being the future of our one-day team, and I think that team in Perth, I reckon. Out of that team that played, there'll be 7 or 8 that'll be part of the Champions Trophy squad. I think I think the result is disappointing, but the actual planning behind it was sound.
Did you know that there would be pushback when you had some of a critical mass of players not there for Perth in what ended up being the series decider?
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I think if potentially if that series had been flipped on its head and we'd started in Perth and finished in Melbourne, it may have looked different. But quite often the spotlight comes on the back of the result. I think we played a similar makeup of team against the West Indies at the back end of last summer, knowing that we were heading to New Zealand for a Test series. And got a good result there, and that removed some of the scrutiny. So the result was absolutely disappointing. And in an ideal world, we'd love a schedule where we can field a first choice team more often. But sometimes that we do have to prioritise different series. It's not if you look ahead 3 or 4 years, potentially. We may not have as many multi-format players that go across all 3 formats as we do now. It's a luxury. We've got some incredible players that have the ability to do that. So it may be that it was a one-off.
Does it? So I think the philosophical part of it, George, for all that you've explained, does it cheapen the Australian shirt to have teams shift like that?
I hope not. Certainly, I imagine if you ask the players that played, it wouldn't. If they end up being players that play in the Champions Trophy or are part of our 2027 World Cup squad, and we've managed to get 20, 30 games into them, they can click as a team and they can understand how each of their teammates play, and you can get some bit of synchronicity in that. Then I think that becomes really important. And that's, like it or lump it, that's sometimes what these one-day bilateral series become. There's a really clear sort of build-up, I think, in one-day cricket to 2 major tournaments, and quite often throughout the the couple of years in the build up to that, some of your teams or series can look a little bit different.
Did it make it just a little bit harder for everyone to swallow with the captain at the Coldplay concert?
So it certainly seems it's been harder to swallow for some. I mean, I think once you're not with the team, we certainly wouldn't expect that that those people then just aren't allowed to leave their house or sit in their house. Again, all those players that weren't playing, they're preparing, they're building, they're still finishing off their work to get ready for that Test series. I think they head back to Perth at the end of this week for a 4-day block in the lead up to that. So what players choose to do in their own time, I think, is their choice.
I think you've got the real life case study on the other side of the coin, and that's Josh Inglis. So he's a member of the Test squad, but he's doing the full load. So 5 flights in 10 days, which does that illustrate sort of the absurdity of it? If you commit everybody to it, this is what a Test preparation would look like?
Yeah, that's the challenge. And Josh isn't in the first player to go through this, and quite often it does happen to members of the team who are on the fringes or on the peripheral a little bit, that they do get thrown around a little bit, and that's the opportunity that they need to grab. I think in all likelihood Josh won't be in the playing 11 for that first Test. Now that obviously may shift if something moves late, but he has shown that he can move through the formats. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, back to that first point, that each individual was prepared and planned as to what the start of their year may look like. And I think throughout the summer we quite often name a squad and then look through the schedule and see where we can try and get our 12th, 13th, or 14th players to continue playing some cricket. There's a balance between having your squad there ready to go, but making sure they're actually still getting enough cricket to be game ready if the opportunity arises.
So the red ball side of things, George Bailey is our chief selector. Why have you chosen Nathan Mcweeney as the Test opener?
We like his technique, temperament. We think he's got the game to succeed at Test level. Conscious that it's unlikely that will be linear. I don't think there's many players that go through their Test career where that is, but we think he can succeed. And I also think he complements the team, and that's an important factor too, the balance of what you want your makeup of your 11 to look like.
Is it a guess that he can become an actual opener?
I'd like to think it's a little more than a guess, Gerard, but I guess we could all run our fingers down the list of leading run scorers or leading wicket takers and just work our way through the top. But that's not necessarily how cricket teams work. It's how they fit together. I think potentially the one day team that played recently, I think that was a good example of that. I don't think there's players in there that actually don't have the capacity to perform at one day level. But one thing that was quite apparent, I thought, was that they just didn't quite gel. They didn't quite know how each of their teammates worked and what it looked like when they were in partnerships and working together. And we certainly think Nathan will complement that with the players that he has around him in the Test team.
So you introduced the idea that he'd batted a lot in the first 10 overs for South Australia, which is right. And then Gideon Hagan and Ed Cowan crunched some numbers. And essentially it's 16 innings at 358 runs at 22. Is that less convincing with the numbers actually broken down?
No, the point was that it will, in our minds, it won't be a major adjustment for him. And certainly talking to Nathan, the way he prepares to go and play for South Australia when he does bat at 3, is that it's a very similar mindset and a very similar way that he'll approach it. So again, we think he's got the game that will succeed at Test level.
What does it say to the dozen or so specialist openers across the states, George, that you've gone for a top order batter to move into the opening slot?
Yeah, again, I think I referenced this the other day. I imagine, when you do chat to them, that initially it does feel hollow and that they would be disappointed. But we do value Shield cricket. We're always looking for how that top order works together. It's not. There's been a couple of circumstances where we have looked for and utilised players who haven't traditionally opened, but that's not to say that that's a template for the future. At different times we'll pick the player that we think is best suited for the role, both individually and also how they fit within the team.
So the fixation has been on the slot that we knew was open. It'll be academic if the established players don't make big runs. How critical is it that your top six, and particularly the five established batters, actually churn out what we would regard in Australia as industrial-sized runs?
Yeah, absolutely. On a number of fronts, I think that clearly that sets up the Test summers. For those players, it sets up your innings. Incredibly, it gives you bowlers a rest in between innings. It gives you your best chance to take 20 wickets. So all of those things, I think, will be crucial, and that's really the bit that I'm excited and can't wait for, is just to see how that goes into your incredibly strong team. They've got great depth. I've got great options, I think, as we go around the grounds around Australia and play some different conditions. So each and every test is going to be a real challenge. There's been enormous speculation about where everyone will bat and how that will fit together. But I think now that that's in place, the focus rightly should shift to absolutely to performance.
Is Manus Labuschagne's form over probably a couple of years now a concern to you?
Not a concern, but knowing Manus, I think he'd be keen to start churning out the runs that he has in the past, and not so much from an individual perspective, but again just to help contribute to the team and what they can do in terms of setting up those games. We know it's a critical role batting at three. It's a really important place and Martin held that position for a period of time. So again, he's one that he was part of that group that we prioritised, not travelling to Perth twice in a week, so he can finalise his preparations. But I imagine he's one that would be very keen, as all the top six, all the top seven would be, to put some big runs on the board this summer.
The bowling side of things, do you anticipate using more than the three frontline quicks across the 5 Test series?
Yeah, you always plan to, just so that, you never know what is going to happen in these tests. The three frontline quicks in Pat, Josh and Mitch have played an incredible amount of cricket together. But you're always prepared that at some point in the summer that may shift. I think we were as prepared this time last year for the same thing, but for a number of reasons that didn't occur, and they got through the whole Test series. So there's a couple of points. I think there's a reasonably good gap between the first and the second Test. It's a really short turnaround between the second and third Test. There's a short turnaround between Melbourne and Sydney. So there's a couple of points there where, it'd be really important to make sure that those guys are still fresh and able to perform at their best.
How untimely was the Michael Nissa injury on that front then?
Yeah, that hurt. That was frustrating. It was great to see Michael back to his best and performing really well. He's obviously great skills in certain conditions with the ball, and also very handy lower order batsman as well. Good catcher. So he's a great all round cricketer, and he would have very much been in the mix. So that was frustrating and disappointing for Michael to get that injury when he did.
Do you know when he would be available?
No, I think the last I sort of heard around that was that it would be a return during Big Bash at some point, and knowing the challenges of getting your body up to the rigours of Test cricket, I think it's unlikely that he would be in the mix to sort of be part of this Test squad through this summer.
Yeah. Well, that is untimely. All right, so that's sort of the here and the now, George. That you clearly have to have an eye toward the future succession planning and depth, and that's part of what you've explained with the ODI squad. What would you say about Australia's stocks, as when it was time to pick the next batter, it wasn't entirely obvious. There's probably a world in which you would like that to really be declared through weight of performance. There feels like, I don't know, we have our established generation, we have a good group of teenagers. What have we got in the middle? What's your assessment of the stocks at the moment?
I guess there's two ways of looking at that. Is I think for many it's nice if it's a really clear, logical person to take that role. But at times that can also highlight that there may not be much depth. I think the speculation around this and the different names that have been thrown up, depending how you want to sort of structure your team, is really interesting and actually shows that we do have good depth. I think the way I look at it is that I'm always more concerned when there's only one very obvious candidate and there's not much else. I think it's a much more exciting time. Yes, it leads to harder decisions and potentially a player who feels aggrieved and disappointed, but certainly holds the Australian cricket team in better stead when you've got three or four names and on any given day, there's nothing to say that you couldn't pick or structure up a team differently and hopefully still get the result that you want.
And is there enough? Is there enough in the 20-something bracket to restock as we reach the natural retirements of well-established and indeed great players?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you would have, again, speculating. We'll never know until. And I'm always conscious that, particularly, for some of those players, over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years, as they transition, there'll be some players coming out that are, generational great players and have been for a very long time. So I think managing the expectations that the players that come in, often take a little bit of time to find their groove and slot into that. And again, I think with Test cricket, it's not necessarily about having to find 5 or 6 of them in any one year. I think if you can balance that and naturally 1 or 2 of them come through every 1 or 2 years, then that's a pretty nice fit. And we've seen that. I think clearly Cameron Green's injured. Will Pukovsky's had his unfortunate run, which has curtailed his career, but we've seen we've seen some younger spinners get opportunities at different times. We've seen some younger quicks get opportunities, probably more through the white ball space. But yeah, we're confident that over the journey at different times, those players will start to transition into the Test team.
All right, let's see. George, terrific. Thanks a lot for taking the questions this morning, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the tests.
Can't wait. Thanks, Gerard.
Good on you. George Bailey is the Chief Selector for Cricket Australia.